Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Tharawat Magazine podcast for family businesses and entrepreneurs. Today marks a very special occasion. We're starting our first series, so this is going to be part 1, and it marks the occasion of my really excellent trip to Scotland a few weeks ago, where I got to visit an iconic place, a very historical place, which is called Scone Palace. So a little bit more about Scone. Scone's history traces back at least to the 9th century, claiming its fame for being the crowning place of the Kings of Scots and home to the Stone of Destiny. I know you can't make that stuff up. It was believed that at the time, no king was allowed to reign over Scotland before being crowned at Scone. And when entering the estate, I can tell you from experience that you can just feel the history in the air, and which is very much helped by the red sandstone house being really enhanced by green lawns and majestic trees, and dare I mention it, actual live peacocks walking on the lawns. So it's a very impressive site, and a gorgeous site at that. Very highly recommended by this editor to everyone who's listening. But Scone is not only one of the most important historical sites in Scotland. It has also been in one family's hands for hundreds of years. So when we met young Viscount William Stormont, the future Earl of Mansfield and the one-day Steward of Scone Palace, we basically spoke to what amounts to the 16th generation of his family legacy. The family is part of the Murray clan, and Viscount Stormont can trace back his lineage to approximately 1100 AD. And so it's a very fascinating story that he has to tell in terms of what it's like to get a legacy that's 16 generations old and what that means in a 21st century setting. So without further ado, here is part 1 of my conversation with Viscount Stormont at Scone Palace in beautiful Scotland. So, William, I think when we speak to most people and we tell them that you are the 16th generation of your family legacy / family business, I believe it is very hard to believe for most people when we tell them. So it might be a good idea to give our listeners a bit of insight as to how it came about that you guys have been around for this long and how it is linked to this beautiful Scone Palace that we're currently sitting in.
Okay, Ramit. Yeah, so it's all very confusing. We have different names. So that's quite a useful place to start. So I am now Viscount Stormont. My father is the Earl of Mansfield, just to confuse. But our actual sort of surname, or sort of clan name, it's what my sisters are called, is Murray, like the tennis player, Andy Murray. So we're from the Murray clan. We are not the chieftains, the chief of the clan. We are cousins who did exceptionally well for themselves. So in terms of the Murrays, much debate on this front, but we can trace our heritage back to 1100 or so, essentially with the Conqueror. Coming across with the Norman invasion, and have been in this area for 900 or so years. Our family, our branch of the Murrays, we made a step up, a leap up in 1600, when a certain Sir David Murray of Gosparty, there's much debate again on this front, but supposedly foiled a plot and saved the king from being kidnapped and possibly murdered. And because of that was rewarded greatly. So that's when we came to Scone. He was rewarded with the title the first Lord Scone, and was given what was previously an abbey as his secular lordship, and we've been here for 400 years ever since.
So Scone wasn't a lordship before your ancestor was put in place. It was an abbey. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah. So the really interesting thing about Scone is, although my family has some interesting history, the reason why people come to Scone is not really because of us. It's really because Scone was the crowning place of Scottish kings, and also the first site of a recorded parliament in Scotland. There is a huge wealth of history here at Scone, which goes, as I said, far beyond our family and our achievements. And there's so many great names from Scottish history, and Macbeth, Robert the Bruce, Indeed, actually, the last, having mentioned Macbeth, the last word in Shakespeare's Macbeth, the play, is Scone. When Macduff, the man who kills Macbeth, says, "Thanks to all and one to coming here to see me crowned at Scone," and that's quite cool. But Scone is of immense importance in terms of Scotland's national history, because of it was a seat of power essentially, and where many believe the sort of Scottish nation was built from in the medieval times. So the first sort of date that can be attached to Scone is about 840.
Wow! So this is not just a rich heritage in terms of your family itself, but also even before that, the place itself holds a lot of legacy and a lot of mystique probably attached to it, and a lot of history. Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on when you take us on a tour around this beautiful grounds and the palace, which we're really very much looking forward to. Tell us a little bit more about what you meant when you said like your branch of the family has done particularly well for itself. So you said like your cousins, which of course after so many generations you're bound to be cousins of someone. But tell us about what you meant by like, your branch has done well for itself. Does this relate to how you've grown your fortunes, how you've expanded into business activities? Like what happened there?
So yeah, it's an interesting story. There's been lots of ups and downs and ins and outs. So we've only very recently, in my understanding, become a business family, and you could say very recently. But let's say we've got 4 centuries now. We'll call it 1 century, but really even maybe less than that in terms of years. Previously, we were politicians, peers, and sort of the landed, and so ruling over various parts of Scotland and assisting kings to do that. I said there were lots of sort of ins and outs and ups and downs. For quite a long time, we decided to back the wrong kings, the kings that were expelled, the Jacobites, and were severely reprimanded on several occasions. And Scone at that time was actually uninhabitable. There were holes in the roof. Our family was rich in name and nothing else. It was when 100 or so years after we first came to Scone, came to sort of power as it were, that a 4th son of the family, he really picked up his game, and he went to London at a very young age. Was an incredibly intelligent individual, and he decided not to get into politics because you couldn't make so much money there. But also it would have been very difficult for him to shine there because of his politics, and the press of the day would have been on his back because he was Scottish and his family supported the wrong people, etc., etc. So he decided to go into the judiciary and to be a lawyer, and that's when our family regained its fortune. And so he did extraordinarily well for himself, became the Lord Chief Justice, and was described on quite a few occasions as being the second most powerful man in the British Empire, second to the king. Wow. So that's when our family, we came back with a bang. And so then the second Earl was the ambassador in Paris. He was the number 1 diplomat of his generation. And then the third Earl was a sort of stalwart member of court and parliament. And it was at that generation where there were sort of children were godsons and things like that of the royals, and so there was a real connection there. So we come back with a big bang. And that's when we'd established a real estate up in Scotland, which was highly traditional. Highly traditional. It had forestry and agriculture and other things like that. And the third Earl, we have a real connection with forestry, our family. The third Earl supposedly planted 3.5 million trees, which I don't know if that's a lot, but it sounds like an awful lot to me.
When was that? The third Earl? When did he?
The third Earl died in. I forget now. Testing my history now. 1830 or 1840. I think maybe 1840.
That's a lot of trees in 1840.
There's a lot of trees in 1840. And he sponsored a man called David Douglas, who was the sort of head gardener here at Scone, to go on a sort of global trips, and he famously went to Canada and found and sort of the word invented is wrong, but found a load of new species and brought them back to this country. So the first Douglas fir, which I'm sure many of the listeners will be familiar with, the first one is here in the grounds.
Really?
Yeah. And so we had so that was one of the major legacy pieces of our family. And through Douglas's work, the Forestry Commission here in Britain was started, which led to basically a sort of global industry. So that's quite
fascinating.
Cool. But although we had there were elements of business then, and someone like the first Earl, when he was a lawyer, had to be very business minded in ways. I think our family didn't really make a transition for a long time. Although they were business minded, it was more that they were the ruling elite and not businessmen. And I would say that didn't change until really very recently. And even without doing my ancestors down too much, I think it was a struggle. That change of mindset was quite a struggle. So I will, hopefully come September, be the first member of my family to get a proper business education, which is quite interesting. After 16 generations, the ancestors were incredibly intelligent people, incredibly articulate, spoke many languages, including useful things like Greek and Latin. But they were incredibly knowledgeable, and they all had incredible sort of hobbies is the wrong word, but incredible sort of knowledge in different areas. So my great grandfather was an ornithologist, and he really knew his stuff. He was sort of president of the society in Britain and things like that. My father is a great beekeeper, for instance, but no one knew business. I will be the first to know business and hopefully to excel in business. So that it's been a strange evolution and transition for a long time.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I think this is something that's particularly interesting about your family. So doing so well in spite of actually not transitioning into anything that's trade or something like that, by being experts really at what they did, right? So expertise seems to be running like at a very high level of importance for all of you for generations now. But was it the perception of what it meant to be in business that held your family back from considering themselves a business family for so long? Was there sort of like a sense of, as a peer, you should not be meddling in sort of like business-like type activities? Or
it's a very, very interesting point. I've often considered that. I think there probably was an element of that. Or maybe if it wasn't that, it was more that they felt there was a greater calling. And their calling was to serve in these various areas, in judiciary, in diplomacy, as a politician. I think that may have been it. There was no particular need to go into business. Things were being looked after, and seeing, although there was a land of the state and sort of greater investments beyond that, there wasn't what you would call an operating business day to day. You definitely would, and hopefully you look at the estate as an operating business, especially nowadays. But in those days, it was definitely not a pet project, but it was not what we would call a modern operating business. So they would spend their time furthering themselves and hopefully sort of the nation and the community around them by being real experts in their fields.
So you transitioned. What happened in terms of the perception do you feel from the outside towards your family? So now you're accepted as being a family that has its own activities in business. So we'll talk about that in a second. But do you feel like, your peers as well, have they accepted, have they transitioned earlier than you? Like, is it a very normal thing that has happened, like, countrywide? Or do you feel like you're being viewed in a different way?
Another very interesting question. I always feel like I'm behind the curve. Just part of who I am. And so I sadly paint my sort of family that way as well. But I've been assured by various advisors of ours and people who are helping us structure our business now that we are ahead of the curve in many situations. There are some there are particular families who just have this knack for doing it, and maybe it's because they've always been in business. That I sort of want to model my family on and want to be like. So maybe that's why I kind of been quite harsh and sort of self-critiquing. But I think we're doing a good job to keep up with the what is a very quick changing world. So I shouldn't be too harsh on the ancestors.
No, definitely not. your nuclear family right now, so your father and mother who are living here at Scone, and you have 3 sisters that are currently working in London, I believe. So how does the family business work right now? So tell us more about, like, who of the family members are currently involved in your actual operating businesses, and maybe tell us a little bit about what industries you are currently active in as a business family.
So to date, and it is to date, we've stuck by the tradition of primogeniture. So my grandfather to my father, and now to me, and that's a transition that is actively happening now, because my grandfather passed away in October 2015, and I think my father has an eye on retirement quite soon. So as you said, my 3 sisters are down in London, but going by the sort of the system of primogeniture, our family, although siblings and then sort of a generation up, sort of aunts and uncles, things like that, are involved, and sometimes in a kind of a branch of sort of business or structure, the main asset is preserved within the 3 or 2 sort of living male heirs, and it's been like that for as you say, 400 years. Having worked in America in family business, I have there is a dilemma, sort of a complex in my mind now, which sees that as being antiquated, and actually in many ways it is a system that carries a lot of liability, because there's 1 or 2 individuals who have a lot of pressure and a lot to live up to, and if things don't go well, then it can all go very wrong very quickly. So currently, although my sisters are not actively involved, and at the moment in terms of actively involved is my father, my mother and myself, my sisters, they are very supportive in ways, and that's one of the things that we really encourage, is having a supportive family where all members of the family, if not actively involved, are engaged in the process.
So they know what's going on in your business, and they try to support you with decisions, or like, is there like a family council that's already been formed, or are you in the process of putting in those family institutions in place?
Yeah, and then we have a family board, but there's no family council beyond that. What tends to happen is that sisters and or brothers tend to marry others and get caught up in what they're doing. So I have a great aunt, for instance, who married the Earl of Murray. So they're very busy further north up in Inverness. She frankly probably doesn't have the time to sort of spend looking at what we're doing. So there's a bit of that involved, I suppose. But they're very supportive, and they feed ideas in. That's one of the things, they feed ideas in. And this is one of the things I've got to sort of look into in my future, is how do we transition and continue to modernise as a family, and what does that mean in terms of future generations? If I have only girls, what does that mean? Who picks up or who takes the pressure on in the future? The title would sadly probably die. There's nothing I can do about that. That's in law, but the family would continue, and Scone would continue. So we'd need to shape that. And obviously the royal family is taking a lead there, because I now believe that a firstborn girl would be the monarch over a son. Yeah. So times are changing. You got to keep up with them.
Fantastic. And so tell us more about like how you transitioned into a business. So now you have a business, you have a holding company, I believe, active in multiple industries. Tell us about the industries that you're active in, and maybe can you explain to us how this links in to what your family's always been doing, and whether that has informed your choices of the industries that you're today active in?
So we've been here for 400 years, and for 400 years essentially we've been farm operators. We're farmers, essentially, Scottish farmers, and there's a very good area of the world to do it. It's a very good place to grow fruit, believe it or not. We're in Scotland, but things like raspberries, gooseberries, very good ground for that. So we have an extensive agricultural estate with arable land, and then leading up into sort of pastoral areas, so cattle and lamb and other things like that. So that is what we've been doing, and we've been doing for a very, very long time. Alongside that, forestry, and although that game has changed sort of over the last sort of 20-30 years, like many businesses have, So we're not doing it on the scale that we used to, and we have contractors who come to do it. There's still forestry operating on the estate. There are some sort of traditional activities still going on, like shooting and fishing, and obviously with the modern day, and I'm a big proponent of this, we are getting into renewable energies, so we're hopefully just about to put our first solar field in, which again is now viable in Scotland because of the new technology, so that's quite exciting. Beyond that, there are a few slightly sort of different operations going on, like Scotland's largest racecourse, which isn't saying much, it is Scotland, but that's quite cool. So that's horses, not cars. And then obviously at the centre of it all, there's the palace itself with its tourism activities, and then events like various rock concerts and things like that in the grounds as well.
So everything that you do as a business still very much centres around Scone and Scotland and your heritage, right? Like, so I think that, so everything is still based around here. Are you planning on globalizing certain aspects of your business in the near future, or is that like something that you're aspiring? Is that why you're going to business school now, is to find out how to spread some of the Scottish goodness across the globe? Or
yeah, I have a very sort of global mind, so yes, I definitely have longer term ambitions to extend our sort of business activities elsewhere. Where that leads to, I don't know. There's a lot of sort of education going in now. Whether that would lead to the sort of sectors and industries that we're very used to, like agriculture and real estate, elsewhere, probably. But you have to diversify. So it could and probably will lead to other kind of operations elsewhere. So we'll see. And yes, the MBA is to prepare me for my future, whatever that may be, and I'm very open to opportunity. So we'll see.
I had the pleasure of speaking to your mother before. It's a really remarkable lady and very funny as well. About the difficulty of finding a balance, right, between having this beautiful place here and having to, of course, to a certain extent commercialize its use, and like to have a commercial aspect to its use, and of course, but your attachment as well as a family to this place as being your home. And how to strike that balance, right? Like, so between leveraging on your own legacy and at the same time keeping it something that is respected and something that you want to carry on, hopefully for another, 16 generations. Tell us about striking that balance. Like, what has it been that has been maybe the biggest challenge for you? Has it been the pressure from the outside, or has it been the pressure within the family of like actually like being able to maintain an operation at this scale, which must be a very expensive operation as well at certain times? What has been your greatest challenge in terms of like bringing this about so successfully?
It's a very good question. I would
take your time.
I would. I think maybe that's what my answer is that we've taken our time, probably rightly so. But if we supplanted Scone and put it somehow in the USA and North America, I think it'd be like a sort of theme park now. It'd be very different. So we've struck that balance between kind of the sort of Downton Abbey, it's still being family as well as being sort of an attraction. And the thing about Scone is that the history here is just too much for it not to be accessible by the public, really.
It's your responsibility.
In a way, it would be very selfish, for people not to be able to access it. And so we often talk about we're stewarding sort of Scone into the future. Yes, it is our property and it's our private property and everything else, and we can enjoy it for that. It is, we are stewards of Scone and need to sort of take that legacy forward. Not being forgetful of ourselves, but striking that balance, as you put it. So I think that we've done it in ways, and I think that we're really accelerating that process now, making sort of more decisions. And I think there will be some changes in the coming years. We'll see what those are, where we expand upon what we're doing now, and really in a way, so we are obviously professional already, but really drive that forward. And I'm quite ambitious. So for me, it's number one or go home. So I want to see Scone as being an absolutely phenomenal destination. Forget about profits and things like that. I want to see Scone being the landmark place people have to come to when they come to Scotland, and to receive all types of awards for innovation and things like that. To make the great history here come alive. That's a sort of a life ambition of mine. But obviously there is that balance that you need to find between it being family and sort of public and commercial. And I think that we've found it in this country. There's quite a few examples of families that have managed to find it now. Firstly, they're pretty big buildings, so you can kind of squirrel away in parts of it and not really have any idea the tourists are here. But I think other families have struggled with that. But I think once you've gone into it, I think you can't really get back. I think it's right for us to continue down this road.
It's an interesting thing, of course, like, one forgets one is in this one place and feels very absorbing. It's an incredible maintenance, it's incredible work, but there's of course many families across England and Scotland who are in your situation currently, like trying to transition. When you say there have been some that have been successful at that, does any example come to mind where you're like, okay, so this family has been very successful at making that transition and was early in making that transition into making it publicly accessible and building their sort of business activities on the side?
Yeah, there are some real standout candidates. The Devonshires at Chatsworth. Obviously, it's a slightly famous name as well, so they have a bit of that kind of public recognition, which is quite useful. But they've also been highly innovative and have done so from a very from early on in the kind of the stately home tourism kind of sector, and they've not been afraid to make changes. And so there's a lot of modern art in the ground, things like that. So they've managed to marry the old and the new very well. So I'd say the Devonshires for sure, and then Lord March at Goodwood, the car festival. Another example there of someone who's been, even though it's nothing really to do with the family and the property, they've found a way to put their property to great use and then really capitalised on that sort of initiative. So someone else, but Lord March in particular understands that the pressure in terms of the cost of restoring and maintaining alongside the commercial, and he's now, I think he's the head of the Historic Houses Association, and he gave a speech a few years ago in which throughout the speech he'd drop in and the beast still needs feeding, and it's a fact. You cannot run away from that. The beast will still need feeding. So you, in a way, you have to be incredibly entrepreneurial. So every day is a new day. New opportunities, can happen every day, and keep building really. Especially when you have an events group. So, like for instance, we're starting a new Halloween event, which I was in New York for the last 2 or 3 years, and went to Sleepy Hollow, the famous Sleepy Hollow, and was inspired by an event there. I want to recreate a similar thing, and that's just one of many initiatives that you have to capitalize on.
This is really interesting what you were mentioning right now. So the marrying of the old and new, and doing that successfully is essentially, I think, what every family business is trying to do whenever it faces a generational transition, right? Like, so you're really a very interesting example, I guess, and that transfers across whether you're a peer or not, across any sort of industry, any family, any geography for that matter, to look at that successful, smoothly making that transition into new things while maintaining one's legacy. The interesting part about the time that we face today, though, and this what we just spoke about before as well, is that change seems to be happening at a very rapid pace. So now you're saying, obviously you're coming in with a lot of ambition, a lot of ideas, and I'm sure most of these will be realized very successfully. But in the face of a world that is changing so fast and almost at a pace where it's hard to understand at this stage, because technology is just overtaking human intelligence at this stage, what's the place of a place like Scone Palace, and what's the place of a family like yours, and even just generally maybe the aristocracy at large? What is the role, do you feel, that you play in a world that is essentially driven by technological progress, and sometimes it seems a departure of everything that we seem like we used to know?
It's very easy to kind of divorce technology from the old world and sort of aristocracy, as you put it. But technology reaches everything. It touches everything, and it's changing everything. So even without us sort of trying, even if we put up barriers there, it'll still change our world. And so you basically got to drop the barriers and be open to it. So yeah, as I said, I want skiing to be a modern and exciting attraction. So it's going to be digital. That's going to happen. In terms of the rate of change and what's our sort of what our role is there and what the future holds. At some point, the world is changing so quickly. I think actually you just need to try and put that in the box slightly in a way and just continue to do what you're doing, because otherwise you can just get swept away by that. Having said that, obviously you need to be very proactive and try to get a grasp of what's happening, and you can do that through just generally reading up on things and asking your advisors, but also from speaking to a community of people who are in a similar position to you. I think that's really important. So speaking to other people who are in agriculture, other people who are in tourism, I think that's of vital importance. You can all muddle through it together in ways, but the rate of change is extraordinary, and it is in terms of a business and sort of a family of wealth. I think diversification is of vital importance. So diversify to keep diversifying, and I think going global, as we covered, is very, very important, because unless something really bad happens, there'll be some part of the world still functioning. So it's important to have that diversity and have the reduced liability as a result.
So not to be afraid to go outside one's comfort zone and...
and that's one actually great trait of Scottish families, is that partly because we were, Scotland has always been slightly behind England, and at times, there was dare I say it, a little bit of oppression, and for political reasons and also purely for financial reasons, Scottish sort of sons were told to get out, go and make your fortune, and so they ended up all over the world. Obviously, we all know America and Canada and Australia and other places, but Hong Kong and Singapore were essentially founded by the Scots. And there are some business families who are very famous, who have this incredible knack of generation upon generation recreating themselves. Whilst preserving the old, they recreate themselves in generation upon generation. And that's the really, really important thing in terms of succession from generation to generation. It is to allow the younger generation in a meaningful way to participate at as young an age as possible, I believe, and to be actively engaged. And for it not to be a case of you allow them to sit in the driver's seat, but you don't give them the key to the car. When you do give them the key to the car, is obviously that's a actual question and point. But in my view, younger is better, and it's just about a sort of gentle empowerment and sort of gradual responsibility. But that the fresh impetus that the next generation often brings is the key to survival. And the key to growth, and to delay that or to crush that enthusiasm is, I think, very bad, and that what leads to a lot of stagnation in family businesses. So the thing to do is, even if the values are slightly different, and I'm sure every generation looks at the next generation and goes, "Oh my God, flip! Who is this person?" The thing to do is to find any kind of commonalities and then capture that, and then. A leadership maxim, just encourage something like the maximum of encouragement and the minimum of interference. It's a British military maxim, and that's something I really believe in. Give them the keys to the car, and then just tell them when they're going off the road. Otherwise, just let them drive.
And for part 2 of our 2-part series with William Stormont at Scone Palace in Scotland, tune in next week again to the Tharawat Magazine podcast for family businesses and entrepreneurs.